And everyone can see Sumi. Hi, Sumi.
Hi, Sharmila. The sound is a little bit muffled, but I think I can make you out.
Okay, all right. We'll try to speak up a bit then.
That worked perfectly.
Thank you. So, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I know it's really hard on the last day of a very long session, 3 days, and lots that we've learned, lots to take away, lots to think about. But thank you for your endurance and making it to almost the end. So with me, all of you have their bios, but with me, the far end on my right is Adrian, and he's with North South Initiative, an organization that does a lot of work on workers' rights. So he's got tremendous knowledge and insight on the ground, real hands-on knowledge and insight on the issue. Also, on my near right is Dong Apolina, who has moved his way up in the building and woodwork industry. And again, also comes from a different perspective, but has also a lot of regional insight. So, and then on our screen, we have Sumi, who apologizes that she can't be here in person. She was very much wanted to be here in person, but was not able to because her husband got COVID just at the start of this week. So in all our interest and safety, she's decided to stay back in Singapore. So she also comes with a kind of more futuristic, looking forward perspective to add to the discourse and discussion. So what we thought we'll do is to have this more as a conversation. So I hope all of you are ready to participate. This is a workshop, so you can't sleep, you got to participate. Ask questions, share your thoughts. If you are having any struggles in your organization or in the work that you're doing with regards to workers' rights, also please, raise them and hopefully together we can find some kind of solution. Because, what we really want is for all of you to be able to take back something that you can put into practice and make real change within the companies that you're in. So thank you all once again. And with that, perhaps I can ask each of the panelists to share their thoughts about, what is the interaction between workers' rights and climate change? Because, for a lot of businesses, we look at climate change more from the, all of us have to think about ESGs now, and climate change is very neatly parked in the environmental pillar. We don't really think about it in terms of workers' rights. So, what is the interaction, do you think? Perhaps, Adrian, you would like to start? We'll do Adrian, Dong, and Sumi, if that's okay. Oh.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrian. I run an NGO called North-South Initiative. And part of the mission and vision is to develop a society that prioritizes social justice, meaning from individualistic rights for society to look more at the common good, right? Working together. So in my work with migrant workers, what we find is that from the discourse, what is the common discourse is the push factor, right? From the country of origin, we find now when we talk to migrant workers, what brought you to Malaysia? So many of them, of course, not having jobs, decent work jobs, but more and more migrants are sharing that they are displaced because the natural environment has become hostile, meaning there are more floods, there are more dry seasons where they and their families cannot conduct agriculture. So there's a kind of push. And of course, that puts a lot of stress on their families and they come to Malaysia. And while in Malaysia, the story is a bit different. What we have noticed is in terms of occupational safety and health, me and my organization, we have done some research where we find a lot of migrants dying in their sleep or just collapsing at the workplace. And of course, in the famous words of Donald Rumsfeld, there's a lot of things we don't know that we don't know, right? So just getting a death certificate of the migrant, doing a bit of interviews, we call it verbal autopsies. We can't really conclude the reasons, but it could definitely be because of their physiology and their environment, whether it's in the hostels or in the workplace. So as we all know, it's not a closed secret that, Malaysia is struggling with its forced labor allegations and safety and unsafe working conditions and even hostels have been has been highlighted again and again. So with that, I think these are the struggles that a migrant worker would face, yeah.
Good afternoon. As introduced, I'm Apolinar Tolentino, but everybody's calling me Dong. I'm a Filipino. It's usual for us to have this pet name. I'm with the Building and Woodworkers International. It's a global union federation representing workers from the building materials and construction, wood and forestry, meaning building and forestry sector. Let me start with trying to do the nomenclature of the title, Just Transition and Workers' Rights. I'll start with the workers' rights. Workers' rights are embedded in the United Nations Fundamental Declaration of Human Rights. It's part of the human rights, discourses, conventions, international treaties. Within the UN body, there is an International Labor Organization, the only tripartite, meaning employers, organization, government, and workers are represented on a tripartite body that are developing and adopting conventions, protocol, recommendations, all on working conditions. And in the ILO, there are what we call core conventions, meaning these are conventions that regardless whether the member state, like Malaysia, haven't or hasn't ratified the 10 conventions, by the mere membership to the ILO, member states are obliged to promote through their national laws these international conventions. And these are no child labor, no discrimination, no forced labor. Occupational safety and health is a fundamental workers' right recently as it was adopted last year, and freedom of association for collective bargaining purposes, meaning 10 international conventions within 5 thematic, if you like, areas. And the very fundamental of this is the freedom of association for collective bargaining. And in almost all countries, these rights are also embedded as a constitutional right, translated in the Constitution and then further down on the Trade Union Act, Employment Act, or even in the Industrial Relations Act. And by workers here, like Adrian described, we also encompass foreign workers or migrant workers, even regardless of their migration status, whether they are undocumented, whether they are documented, they are, by these conventions, starting from the UN, all the way to the ILO, are guaranteed as a human person. So that's the workers' rights side. On the other side, we have the just transition. It's also very lofty, very full of very broad principle. And by the trade union definition, it's a transition from a high carbon economy to low and climate resilient that provides opportunity for workers. And workers here being not just employed in the enterprise or the factory or the plant or the work sites, construction site, but they are also consumers. They are also members of the community. And these different roles require workers through trade unions that we are representing them to be part of the debate, if you like, and coming up with policies and programs on climate change. And as we have this discussion, you will see, for example, how it is important for all of us to deal with the heat stress because of the climatic change of the climate, as we will discuss it.
And we can hear from Sumi as well.
Thanks, Sharmila. I can't see you all, so I'm guessing what your body language is. Thank you. I'd raise 3 points. The first, really, both Dong and Adrian have built on. So just to name it, the first is around risks to workers, but at various orders, right? So both Dong and Adrian have spoken about the first order impacts on workers, whether it's heat, stress, availability of food, health and safety in the workplace, and those are familiar issues. The second order is how it's going to affect their families or people at home, and how will that change the patterns of remittances, their pressures, mental health pressures in terms of worrying about families that may be hit more often by floods or droughts or various other natural calamities as a result of the climate changing. So that's the impact on workers. And one of the things that I think we need to pay attention to is whether or not the current protection measures that we have in place to ensure workers' health and their dignity in the workplace, whether or not those are going to be fit for purpose in a climate change world. So that's the first. The second thing I would talk about is we do a lot of work on supply chains, and it's very clear that in the urgency to be able to keep below 1.5, if we even do that, there is a significant amount of supply chain reconfiguration that will need to happen. And that kind of reconfiguration, whether it's because there are climate risks, Adrian talked about the impact on agriculture, whether it's because climate reliant or climate vulnerable sectors are drastically going to change the way they produce and the way in which goods are distributed, or whether it's because supply chains need to decarbonize, there will be effects on workers, and it will certainly affect the relationship between enterprise and workers as some of these changes happen within the supply chain. And then I think the third area to draw attention to briefly is that we've got a confluence of the climate change risks happening very dynamically and quickly, and in that kind of uncertainty that Adrian talked about. And we're moving into a rapidly changing economy, right? Whether it's in terms of moving towards a digital economy, a gig economy. So you've got a whole different configuration of workers in the economic system, whether it's gig economy workers or it's in the way in which women are coming into the workplace, or even changing forms of migrant workers work that's taking place in the economy. So all these three factors are in play. It's highly dynamic, it's very uncertain and unknown, and we're going to have to navigate through that in terms of really paying attention to the interactions and the impacts on workers as a result of the climate crisis.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you for really summing all that up, Sumi. So Dong, I'm just wondering, in the post-COVID world, we see, post-COVID, a lot of businesses closed down, and as a result, and a lot of businesses are still struggling. So their focus really is on the bottom line, right? On ensuring their survivability from a financial perspective. And I'm wondering, post-COVID, have we learned anything about how we relate to our workers? Has anything changed between the employer and employee relationship?
It's a good question. We have experienced different cases of crisis during the outbreak of a pandemic, and for one, it has finally recognized that construction workers, the industry, is an essential part of the economy. Though in some countries, Malaysia, even in the Philippines, the construction was shut down or totally locked down. But in some countries, they managed to get the industry going by having really a strict health protocol in the case of Australia, for example, they, in a matter of months, they were able to re-engineer the work site by a tripartite or even multi-party negotiations and reorganization of the workforce. It shows that it can be done. Not so very enticing in some places that workers were completely abandoned, particularly migrant workers, just like old drug that is being thrown out, and the community will have to, provide them essential provisions from instant noodles, sugar. You remember this, Adrian, at the height of lockdown in Malaysia. They were completely neglected. But at the same time, the workers and the trade unions work together with the employer and the government for recognition of COVID-19 as an occupational disease. It was a good victory. For example, here in Malaysia, one of the first country in Southeast Asia that came into immediately a policy saying that COVID-19 is recognized an occupational disease and therefore compensable. It was followed by the Philippine government and of course Singapore and so on. But this is an illustration that the trade union representing migrant workers and the industry can actually work together with its social partners in coming up with a good sound policy and even programs for the industry. Sharmila, yeah.
Sumi, one of the things that has happened this year is, the fact that the minimum wage has gone up. So it's 1,500 now per worker for the minimum wage. And, we've had for companies a change in the electricity tariffs. So some companies are paying between 30 to 40% more in terms of electricity, unbudgeted, because this, came upon, companies just like that. So I'm kind of wondering, really, what kind of conversation should we be having around watching the bottom line while taking care of our employees? How do we refocus this and have the right kind of conversation?
Thanks, Sharmila. That's a tough question to answer for someone that isn't in industry and facing this day by day, and yet it's a question that needs to be addressed, right? How do you shift the mindset from assuming that there is this natural trade-off between looking after your workers and addressing the rising costs, and actually moving into a mindset of saying, well, there are some possible solutions around this. And I think one way of being able to address it is to be able to look at the short term, but also keep your eye on the medium and long term, and some of the opportunities that are coming out of the medium and the long term, and be able to kind of compartmentalize the immediate hard impact of some of these rising costs. So at the same time that we are seeing these rising costs on the factory floor, we are also experiencing governments increasingly investing in the green transition, right? Yeah. So in Malaysia, you are starting to see growing availability of funding to support SMEs in managing the green transition, whether it's in terms of tax breaks to encourage renewable energy adoption or green tech adoption, or banks offering sustainability-linked loans. I was reading recently about Gagasan Solar, which is the first Securities Commission Malaysia regulated solar fund, with an aim of raising, I think, something like 200 million to ensure greater accessibility for SMEs to solar energy. So, there is some way to go in terms of creating the levels of climate financing in Malaysia, but it is moving in the right direction. So how might companies recognize that there are access to funds that are coming through the green transition that they are able to tap in a way that you can manage your CAPEX such that you can pay attention and invest in your workers in terms of whether it's protecting their physical and mental health in the face of climate impacts or upskilling, and not to see it as a trade-off. But the tough work will be to say, okay, well, let's look out for those opportunities to be able to tap the kind of funding we need, but we keep that goal in mind, right? The goal means fundamentally, we know that workers are our key assets. We know that that's not going to change, at least in the immediate future. You know, even if we do shift to automation, there is this quite long transition where you are going to have to depend on workers being your healthy and productive assets. And how might you look for the opportunities to support you in doing that?
Quite. And you know, just for the participants, there are a lot of funds out there, you know, from the federal government as well as from state governments, that you can look out for. You know, SSM websites and Bursa websites are a good starting point, but even, you know, the state government website sometimes you can access, and you know, that there are funds out there. It's just about tapping into them and ensuring that you know, the way you're spinning it will give you access to those funds. So absolutely, thanks, Sumi. But you know, for Adrian, I'm wondering, what role would a business enterprise, or what role should business enterprises play in integrating workers' rights with the energy transition?
Yeah. So in Malaysia, you know, some of the companies have just come out from you know, certain sanctions because of you know, violating workers' rights in terms of having forced labor. So if we think that compliance or following the law is going to be expensive, just think of not complying, what's going to happen. So that is of course forced labor. But when it comes to just transition, we cannot look at the workforce in our own bubbles, right? We have to look at the whole supply chain, different tiers, not just at the Malaysian component, but globally, right? All workers want to work with dignity. They need to be compensated justly. Are our CEOs ready to have that conversation? Or are we looking at migrant workers as merely the tool of extracting labor and, you know, contributing? I think the division of profits also will be challenged and tested. How much will you need to reallocate to give workers their salaries, their just remuneration? And of course, how you're going to help cushion some of the impact on climate change, for example. Remember when there was this big flood in Shah Alam, right? Huge industrial area, all mega companies, some SMEs, you know, benefiting from migrant labor, right? But when Shah Alam was flooded, yeah, of course, we rescued, we rushed, the nation mobilized, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. The Malaysians were rescued, right? Provisions given. The migrants, how long do you think they had to wait till somebody came and said, hey, here's some rice or here's some food? It was almost a week, and there were 1 or 2 cases almost 2 weeks before anyone reached out. And it was funny because even after reaching out, they were offered the thinnest mattress. You know, we all enjoy 12-inch mattresses, but because they are migrants, you give them one thin mattress. And instead of proper nutrition, they were offered the 60-cent bun, right? That small. And they were telling me, Adrian, what is this? We are half dead. We have developed the nation, helped develop the nation. And when we faced the flood, we were given the least protection. So there's a certain frustration. And for me, I think we need to change our worldview of how we look at the foreign workers, right? They're not just tools of extracting human resource. Look at the diversity they bring into the country, the richness of problem solving. And, you know, you'll be surprised why some CEOs, some human resource managers prefer migrants over Malaysians. You know, it's a challenge to all of us. It's not just because they're willing to work extra hours. They bring with them a certain problem-solving skill because of the resilience and challenge that they have faced. So that is something nobody wants to talk about. Even HRDF or MPC, they know it. But instead of looking at them as mere tools, let's look at the diversity that they bring in, the value. And, you know, we'll find a balance where Malaysians and migrants can work together, right?
You're absolutely right. I met a girl. We often have a kind of bad view of migrant workers, but I met a young girl who was our cleaner. She was just cleaning the office, part of the general cleaning force. And every now and then I would encounter her and say hello to her and all that kind of thing. And one day she said, "Oh, I'm leaving." And then I discovered she'd been given a scholarship to study economics in Norway. And I thought, and here she's cleaning the toilet. So yeah, we underestimate the quality and capability of some of the workforce who do not have the opportunities that we have. But kind of like sticking with you, Adrian, what kind? You spoke about forced labor, and we know that a lot of these companies had to pay large sums, kind of remedial, right, to remedy the problem and basically repatriate funds to the foreign workers who are affected. But from a risk perspective for the companies and business enterprises, SMEs as well, what rights do the workers have in terms of remedies? What do you think they are entitled to? And therefore, what is the risk exposure for these businesses if we do not have an eye on our workers and take care of them? What is, what do we need to provide for and be thinking about already today so that we're not exposed, to the kind of sanctions?
I mean, the ILO is very clear. They have articulated 11 indicators of forced labor, right? But that's theoretically. For me, whether companies are ready for that worldview and mindset change, I think we need to address that at a fundamental level. Bringing in workers, migrant workers, 12, 16 hours, they are willing to work. That's also another problem. But, we need to find a balance where we don't create artificial labor environments. Because tomorrow, if let's say our migrant community finds a more attractive market to work, right, I'm sure they will say bye-bye to Malaysia. And even before the pandemic, the industries were crying. I've seen literally crying to the government. Even barbers, right, today they are saying, who's going to cut your hair? So, we have this labor shortage, so-called labor shortage. But, it could be because the forced labor environments are discouraging Malaysians to work. And of course, from the government perspective, let's go to gig economy. I mean, come on. Do you think the gig economy is so attractive? Is it safe? It's not even regulated. So these are short-term solutions I think we need to address, Sharmila, before talking about the forced labor. There are systemic flaws. I don't know whether maybe we are just not intelligent enough or Putrajaya doesn't care. I think we need to poke holes and remind them. And the SMEs and supply chains need to hold the government accountable, right? Our labor migration recruitment follows a kafala-like system. A worker is tied to one job. Yeah. Imagine if you did that to a Malaysia. Hey, you can only work here. This is your life path for the next 10 years. What happens to creativity? What happens to innovation? Yeah. So those fundamentals need to be addressed. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Adrian. I mean, that's something that we really need to think about, and maybe that's one of the things that SMEs together can challenge the government with. But I think it also serves our purpose, doesn't it? To know that you've got this person working for you for the next 5 to 10 years serves our personal benefit, our company's benefit. So maybe we also need to have that change in mindset ourselves. Sumi, I was wondering whether you have any thoughts about the kind of critical reflection SMEs may need to undertake, in terms of how the industrial processes that were started and introduced to ensure equality and fairness in the workplace need to be are now causing some kind of inequality and unfairness in the whole green energy transition.
Thanks, Sharmila. trying to get my head around this question and then thinking a lot about what Adrian has said, and maybe what I'll do instead is to build on a point that, or reinforce a point that Adrian has made, because I think fundamentally this is the challenge, right? That we have in place an extractive, degenerative economic system in Malaysia, in Singapore, in many parts of the world. In fact, in most parts of the world, we have in place an extractive, degenerative economic system in which workers play the part of being extracted from, and value is not distributed to where value is created in a value chain. And I think what has happened within industrial relations, but also in terms of our broader labor policies that we've introduced, in many ways we've layered up mechanisms that are designed to protect workers, but in a way that keeps the current system intact. So, at the very harshest critique, you could say that we've put in place sticking plasters so that, the system works in a way that's a little bit kinder to workers, but really fundamentally, it's still an extractive system, and workers risk being commodified in that kind of a system. So we are at this moment now of having to transform through a crisis, and it is a crisis. We are going to cross thresholds of 1.5 degrees, and we are no longer going to be in a world where we are experiencing, linear one type of impact as a result of crossing 1.5. We're going to be experiencing tipping cascades, right? Where, one kind of climate impact is going to trip another, which is going to trip another, and then you're going to have to deal with the whole lot, and the impacts on workers is going to be pretty significant. So what's the overhaul that needs to take place in industrial relations and the mechanisms that we have in place to protect workers that's going to address that and actually use it as an opportunity to rebuild our economic systems in a way that are ecologically safe, but also socially just, or rather than but, and are socially just. And we've had a little bit of an experience of what that might be like through COVID. And so I think we're also, what we've seen is that companies can respond quickly. I mean, the suddenness with which the pandemic crisis hit workplaces required employers to make quick, proactive decisions to implement new ways of working for workers, vaccinate workers, change compensation structures, and without having to always being able to rely on the established structures of negotiating between government, union, worker reps, or business. You just had to act, right? Yeah. And clearly that shift in industrial relations practice over COVID has left some permanent evolutionary changes, which we're still making sense of, but it's experience that we can build on. The final point I'll make is that there is clearly a role for government. Deloitte recently reported that Malaysia is doing well in putting in place good policy measures for greening industry, providing enterprise incentives for greening, skills development to build green talent, and creating an active labor market. But the report also pointed out that Malaysia has got some way to go in putting in place the social protections and addressing labor rights and social dialogue processes to support that just transition to a green economy. So I guess where I'm landing with all that is that, we do need to transform the very fundamentals. There are systemic impacts that really just need to kind of be re-questioned and redesigned. Otherwise, we layer on compliance mechanisms that just put on the plasters, but the problems will still exist and they will filter through like water finds cracks through compliance, making compliance either very, very difficult or meaningless.
Yeah, and it ends up being a one shoe fits all, which doesn't really work across industries or even kind of vertically, right? But I like to think that maybe what we need to start doing is thinking about our workers not just as workers, and a commodity, but more as partners in our business. People who are going to help us get our end product, whether it's a service or a actual product, that they are partners in it. Because throughout the value chain, if we don't understand the value that each person or each group of people within that value chain adds to the finished good, the finished good will be substandard. And in this globalized world, in a very competitive world, we need to be at the top of the game. And every part of that value chain, every individual who is working on that value chain, especially the early part of value chain, really needs to be empowered and treated in like manner so that they produce the best quality for us. I'd like to have this opportunity to open this up to the floor as well and to hear your thoughts or comments to what has been discussed to add flavor to it. Does anyone have any comment or question or thoughts? Thanks, Hakim. If you can just introduce yourself so that people online...
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hakim. I come from Souls Energy. We provide solar for residential homes. And how we do it is we train people from marginalized and indigenous communities. Then we hire them. Then we put on solar on roofs. It's pretty basic formula. But 9 years into doing this, I'm a little bit curious and concerned. It's the relationship between large solar installers that we're going to get more of, yeah? And what happens is they bring in a fairly cheap migrant labor, and the working conditions are questionable. And how do I, so this is the question, how do I, while I'm hiring locals, in this case people from marginalized communities, how do I avoid pitfalls where I perhaps practice this behavior of, I'm here to save you guys by hiring you from marginalized communities, and now, in fact, I don't treat my workers with the same level of payment, for instance, or the same quality of employment that somebody else might have. So I guess in a confusing sort of way, one, I'm concerned about how do I scale this out, and how do I apply best practices to make sure that the people that I'm employing from these marginalized communities are taken care of. I'm not practicing slavery. I'm treating them with respect and all of that. Are there any frameworks that I should be thinking about applying to my internal processes so that I can scale this out and make the world better, I guess?
Excellent. Thanks, Hakim. That's a very good question. Can ILO have estimated that there will be 6 million lost jobs by the year 2030 and 24 million new jobs created. So that's 18 million new jobs by 2030, most of which are going to be in the green energy sector. So, maybe I can ask Sumi to answer Hakim's question. What kind of policies should we be thinking about? This is a new sector, new industry, perhaps. This is an opportunity for us to build it right, ground up. So what standards, processes, procedures, policies should we be looking at in the renewable energy sector?
Thank you, Hakim, and thanks, Sharmila. It's really good to have that reflection, Hakim, from you in terms of, you're saying, well, I'm doing the right things, but in the face of utility scale coming in with the big incumbents who are transitioning from their fossil fuel sectors into renewables because either they have to or they're recognizing new markets, it's hard to maintain that good practice that is coming more from the DRE a part of renewables right now. So, I hear your challenges and what all I can say is, please prevail, because what we'd hope is for how you're addressing your responsibilities in this new sector to influence the bigger players, but that's easier said than done. However, what I would say and what is good is that when just transition and Dong mentioned this, I think I heard part of Dong is less clear than Adrian in terms of the mic, but I think what Dong was mentioning was that there is this there has been a lot of critical policy attention being paid to ensure how when we move towards the green economy, it means transitioning workers from fossil fuel industries and supporting adaptivity for those in climate reliant or climate vulnerable industries, that we need to make that a just transition. And that's really important that policy attention is going there. It's necessary and it's complex. But I think what we are seeing emerging now is that there is an evolved dimension of the just transition concept, which involves an important focus on also ensuring not just how those are coming out of jobs get transitioned into new green jobs, but how do those that are entering green jobs enter it in a way that they're guaranteed to be safe, healthy, dignified, rights respecting jobs. My organization has been working with an initiative called the Responsible Energy Initiative to work with the renewable energy sector. And we specifically, Hakim, actually focused on utility scale for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. How do you enable that sector to put in place the structures and the practices that will support positive rather than adverse social impacts? And no doubt some of you in the audience would have picked up on the stories around forced labor in solar panel production in Xinjiang, and how this has led to the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act in the US. So I think what we can draw from is the fact that it's on the radar now, and I think it will rapidly climb the radar. You've also probably seen the audit reports that First Solar published on issues around recruitment fees and passport retentions of contracted services of workers in their Malaysian sites. So it's on the radar, and I think therefore the impetus is on the government as it tries to reach its targets of 31% of renewables going into the energy needs by 2025, and then moving to 40% by 2035. How do you put in place the conditions whereby the renewable energy sector's value chains are able to build those business and financing models that create positive impacts for workers in the supply chain. And manufacturing will be key here if you look across the value chain, just because Malaysia is such a global hub, right? So last word on this, I think, how can SMEs in the sector actually do their part to position Malaysia to achieve a holistically clean energy transition in the country? So clean environmentally, because it's renewables, clean from corruption, because like all other sectors, it's going to be vulnerable to corruption, if not already, and clean from workers' rights abuses.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sumi. Dong, would you like to respond as well?
It's a very interesting case, Joaquim, and it's a classical case of race to the bottom, whereas you're doing community service to these indigenous groups, but you're disincentivized because of the influx of foreign workers that is diving down the wages that will undermine the very essential contribution of this community for climate resilient, in this case, installation of a panel. This is where the government should have really a strong hand on the regulation framework. In your case, to my mind, small enterprises like this will have to be incentivized, right? Tax and resources that can be generated in order for an enterprise like this to upscale and contribute in a wider agenda of climate resilient source of energy. No doubt about that. On a similar case, on wood or forestry products as building materials, is the same. If you go out of this building and even inside, you can see green building certification sponsor everywhere in this complex, right? And you may have heard about this forest certification or wood certification. Even books, boarding passes, tissue paper are certified as complying with environmental, social, and governance, as we have heard it, right? But many cases, not only in Malaysia, the rights of indigenous people are violated over their ancestral domain. And the products or the materials that are being used left and right in this high-rise in Kuala Lumpur are all concrete, steel, that highly extractive economic undertaking or activities. But there are obviously substitute wood for one. In Switzerland, they will build this the highest high-rise building after Sweden and Canada, all wood, certified, right? And very climate resilient. What I'm saying is, there are many initiatives in Malaysia in terms of forest and wood certification. There is this Malaysian Timber Certification Council that owns this certification scheme, where the community rights, the free, prior, informed consent have to be complied with, and workers' rights and indigenous community will have to be protected. And that is a good marketing tool, to be blatant about it. If you say this wood is produced in a sustainable way, and down the line, the supply chain, and then you will get incentive, and on the other hand, those who are still supplying the construction industry by cement, by steel, will have to be, in a way, penalized or disincentivized in order to shift, right? And if we talk about the community, indigenous people in the community, protecting their ancestral domain, can also earn in terms of what they call the ecosystem services of the forest. You don't touch the forest, this old growth forest, other than those commercial plantation forests, for cultural, aesthetic, and ancestral domain claim, but that can still earn, because it can be promoted as ecotourism, for example, similar to carbon trading. Those carbon that are stuck in that indigenous forest, if they can own it and be certified, can be bought by in a commercial transaction. Companies willing to sponsor it for 5, 10 years. So you keep the forest intact for the purposes of the community, indigenous people, and then you have a plantation certified, supplying to construction industry, and it can be upscale, similar to what you're doing. That's an illustration of a global supply chain. And this is only in the context of Malaysia. And these products can also be, with the regulation of Europe, North America, can enter with the, in a way, imprimatur, saying these are good products because they are certified, they have been compliant with the environmental, social, and governance. The reverse is what happened in the glove industry, like just a year ago, right? The US refused to accept these glove products because it has been ascertained that these products had been produced with forced labor. And we don't want that to happen in the industry, critical industry in this country. Sharmila.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dong. I mean, I think from all three speakers, we've had some really good insights of what we need to do. We need mindset changes within our companies, even ourselves individually. We need the mindset changes, but we also definitely need government support for SMEs, in terms of creating the right kind of policies and framework to ensure that we are able to build, especially with the renewable energy sector, we are able to build the right kind of workforce, a protected workforce, a workforce where there is fairness across the board, not just for our migrant workers, but also our local workers, our indigenous communities, that they are not shortchanged as well. So, does anyone have any other final points you would like to raise before I ask each of these panelists to give us their closing remarks? If there isn't, then maybe I can start with Adrian. Just your couple of minutes closing remarks.
So I can imagine how complicated it may feel, but certain basic things like labor rights, they're already standards, there's already the law. I think SMEs, supply chains, the human, what I get a sense is that the human resource managers and the sustainability teams need to really get, not get their act in order, but have internal harmonization of SOPs, because before they can even understand basic human resource, you are dumped with ESG, right? And ESG itself, there's 3 components, and even before mastering that, they dump DEI on you. And I don't know what are the next 5-6 acronyms somebody is going to cook up, and your human resource CEO and sustainability team is going to have huge headaches. So do your fundamentals. I don't think anything can go wrong if you focus on the dignity of people, right? And from there, make sure your company's philosophy is clear, and things shouldn't go haywire. Thanks.
Dong?
I look at the Construction Industry Development Board latest on green construction, and as well as what they call the Construction Industry 0.40, transformation of the industry into more client resilient. And in both of these authoritative entities in Malaysia, they came in very strongly on the need for capacity building and very concrete. And there are recommendations on tie-up with universities, promote apprenticeship program, for example. And it's not a new invention. Again, our affiliate in Australia, for example, they run their own apprenticeship program. Of course, it's regulated by the government. They access these funding facilities, and for the purpose of learning and while doing it at the same time, this apprenticeship also, for our purpose, are recruited into union at the very early stage of their apprenticeship program, and they learn a lot. And there are also many dual technologies that is spearheaded, among others, by Germany, for example. The vocational VocTech, that as they call. This is an essential for the industry to pursue further. And our last point is like, we always hear about the green jobs, but from our experience, green job doesn't necessarily translate into a decent job. They say, some group, some individual are doing a green job. But when we look at that, they're actually picking up garbages, cleaning, and doesn't really have the element of what we call as the decent job. And an ILO has a very straightforward definition of what is a decent work. It must be a freely chosen work, right? There's no discrimination at the workplace. And the full exercise of workers, whether you are a migrant, whether you are a woman, whether you are a lesbian, whether you're straight, are guaranteed and protected, particularly for the right to self-organization and collective bargaining. This is the decent job that should be accompanied within the green job definition of what we're discussing.
Thank you for those concluding remarks, Dong. And Sumi, final words from you.
Thanks, Sharmila. 2 things to riff off Dong. Use the green transition to transform your business models and your relationship with workers within those models. So it's the opportunity, really, it is the opportunity to move away from an extractive, degenerative relationship with workers towards a distributive and a regenerative relationship with your workers, and capitalize on the investments that are coming through climate financing, to tax breaks and the variety of different forms of funding to say use that funding to really transform your business model, just not just kind of putting on the add-ons to address the green. So that's the first one. The second point, I didn't talk very much throughout the course of it, but I wanted to raise attention to, which is that, SMEs and suppliers and value chains are having to deal with a lot of requests from retailers, from brands, from those up on the value chain to make innovations in order for the brands or the retailers to be able to hit their decarbonization targets, or when they want to bring in circularity and various things. They typically only look at the technical aspects, but not the worker implications that the supplier will have to deal with, right? So if you introduce a circularity innovation, your workers may need to be skilled up for that. And if you don't skill them up, you're gonna automate and you'll lose jobs. So pay attention to that. And it's really important to engage in pre-competitive collaboration as suppliers. Figure this out together. Figure out where you can address some of the barriers to this and coordinate so that you can actually really claim your agency and your role in shaping what the just transition should be, and recognizing what you have to do and what you have to bring in and negotiate along your value chain on that basis to shift the power dynamics.
Thank you so much, Sumi. And I just want to thank all of you for staying the course, for participating in this workshop. We're hoping to, after this, put down some real points that we can work on. And there will be further kind of like, smaller masterclass, if you like, where we will deep dive with some of our experts here, but also other experts in this area, deep dive into some, real meaningful changes that we need to see, including in, what Sumi and Hakim were talking about in the RE sector, and how we can work with the government to ensure that we are on par to be global competitors in being green, clean and green in all sectors of our ESG. I just want to leave us with this thought, which came up from this morning, quoting Horta, that, we have become technological giants, but infants in morality and ethics. So, it's something that really bears thinking about. It's I've been on a panel with Adrian. He didn't say it this time, but he often says, do it because it's the right thing to do. And so, sometimes that's what we need to do. We need to just do what is right and go back to the foundations of who we are as human beings, but also there's so much sustainability within our culture, the Malay culture, the Chinese culture, the Indian culture. We have it within our cultures, and we really need to go back, and that's what we need to start extracting, not our timber and things like that. We need to extract our culture and use it to our benefit. So on that, thank you all for being here and participating with us. Thank you.
Thank you.